Hey guys. Tonight, we stumble into a time that's glorified in textbooks. But spoiler alert, isn't exactly a spa day. Ancient Greece. Yep. Marble statues. Gleaming temples. Plato. Dropping truth bombs. But you're just trying to survive the next 12 hours without embarrassing yourself or passing out from dehydration. Picture this. The sun's not even up yet. But the house is buzzing if you can call chickens fluttering around your feet and someone already yelling at the dog buzzing. You peel yourself off a lumpy, straw-stuffed mattress, wrapped in a blanket that smells faintly of goat and regret. Your first breath of the day dust. Lots of it. That's not fog outside the clay window. It's the morning churn of kicked-up dirt from 1,000 sandals. And speaking of sandals, good luck finding yours. The leather's cracked. The straps are broken. And a dog may or may not have chewed the left one into abstract art. You step into the courtyard barefoot and immediately stub your toe on a sun-warmed stone. The kind that seems to store heat from yesterday's sun, just to ruin your morning. Breakfast. Let's not get carried away. There's no Instagrammable platter here. You're handed a bit of barley porridge lukewarm. No honey. And suspiciously clumpy. If you're lucky, you get a wrinkled olive or two. Not even the good kind. Just the kind that whispers you should have been born in a richer house. The bread is so hard, it could qualify as a blunt weapon. You gnaw on it like a beaver with commitment issues. The air smells like a strange mix of goat fur, sweat, smoke from yesterday's fire, and someone's lingering flatulence from the shared sleeping quarters. That someone might be you. Hygiene is optional, and deodorant doesn't exist. You splash your face with rainwater collected in a cracked jar. Then dry off with your tunic. That's your outfit for the day. By the way, 1. Tunic. No socks. Underwear, huh? Not in this economy. Around you. The neighborhood creaks awake. A neighbor yells something about lentils. A young boy chases a chicken down the street with all the finesse of a cartwheel gone wrong. 2 old men sit under a fig tree, already arguing about something that happened 20 years ago. You eavesdrop. Of course. Apparently. Someone stole a sandal back in 417 BCE. And nobody's over it. You finally set off to do something. You're not entirely sure what. Because your role in society is, well, vague at best. Unless you're a land-owning male citizen, and statistically, you're probably not. Your daily itinerary is mostly just survive and serve. If you're a woman, your options are even slimmer. If you're a slave, well, we'll get to that horror show later. As you make your way through the town's narrow, dusty alleys, the ground crunches beneath you. Not gravel-broken pottery. See, Greeks used shattered pots as disposable writing pads. They even voted with them. These shards, orostraka, litter the ground, like ancient post-it notes. You might be stepping on someone's old grocery list or a ballot for exile. Democracy in action. Roosters crow. Dogs bark. And someone sneezes so violently, you instinctively duck. Not that you're avoiding germs, they don't know what those are yet. But you've got other reasons to stay alert. Public sanitation is, how shall we put this, a collective act of faith. Chamber pots are casually dumped out windows. Sometimes without warning. If it hasn't hit you yet, It's only a matter of time. You're basically playing Guess That Splash. The agora, the town square, looms ahead, buzzing with energy and bees. Everything smells faintly of fish and ambition. Stalls creak under the weight of fruit, wine jugs, pottery, and, weirdly, wreaths. One guy tries to sell you a healing onion, while another offers a second-hand lyre with one string and visible bite marks. You politely decline both. Or maybe not so politely, depending on whether you've figured out how to curse convincingly in Doric Greek. Oh, and let's talk footwear again. Those sandals, totally useless against goat poop and mysterious puddles. You keep stepping in things you'd rather not identify. And with no proper sewer system, the streets are basically a running experiment in microbial evolution. Historians still argue whether this daily exposure built stronger immune systems or just killed everyone off by 35. As the sun climbs higher, so does the temperature. Shade is precious. You squint through sweat-stung eyes and wonder how people functioned in wool and linen in 90-degree heat. The answer, they didn't. They just sort of endured. With the help of wine and lots of body odor. Even as you try to blend in, it's obvious you don't belong. Your posture's too upright. Your shoes too symmetrical. And your complete lack of knowledge about olive oil taxation laws makes you a walking red flag. Someone side-eyes your tunic. You try to act casual, adjusting your sash. But you've accidentally tied it the way funeral attendants do. Oops, by noon. You're parched, itchy, and mildly sunburnt. You've had one sip of lukewarm water, 3 unsolicited philosophical opinions, and 0 quiet moments. Honestly, you miss the sound of modern plumbing, or even just a mint. Oh, and remember that bread from breakfast. It's now a projectile in a street game between 2 teenage boys and a bored goat. You're not sure who's winning, but the goat is definitely having the most fun. And this was just the morning. You're about halfway through the day now, and your bladder is making quiet but pointed threats. Time to find a toilet. Except, surprise, there aren't any. Not in the way you're used to. No cozy porcelain thrones here. No doors. Definitely no scented candles. What you're dealing with is either a public latrine, a social event in itself, or a quiet corner with questionable drainage and a few judgmental chickens. You ask someone where the facilities are, and they gesture vaguely toward a wall. Then mime squatting. Not helpful. You wander off and eventually spot a modest structure that looks like it might be promising. You peer inside and are greeted by a low stone bench with a series of round holes cut into it. Underneath, a shallow drainage channel that smells like every bad decision made in the past week. You wait your turn, which involves pretending to admire the graffiti scratched into the walls, some of it shockingly explicit, some of it surprisingly poetic. One doodle appears to depict a man fighting a fish. Another simply reads, "Dion stole my beans." When it's finally your time to squat, you're faced with a brutal reality. There's no paper, no leaves, no help. What do they use? If you're lucky, a sponge on a stick shared. Of course, and hopefully rinsed. If you're less lucky, a shard of broken pottery. Yes, that's right. A potsherd. It's called a pesos or ostrakhan, and it's been used for centuries. You're supposed to scrape, not stab, but ooh. Coordination is key. One slip, and it's less of a hygiene moment and more of a tragic medical emergency. Historians still argue whether the Greeks sanitized these shards in any meaningful way or just had terrifyingly strong immune systems. Either way, you get through it. Barely. The relief is immediate. But so is the regret. You vow never to take 2-ply toilet paper for granted again. Or soap. Or privacy. You head back into the street with a new appreciation for standing. And pants. The afternoon sun is now baking everything in sight to a soft, uncomfortable, crisp. People fan themselves with woven palm fronds. Dogs lie in the shade with their tongues lolled out like pink socks. Somewhere nearby, someone is playing a reed flute. And it's honestly kind of relaxing. Until a donkey sneezes directly into your face. You're now sticky, dusty, and gently haunted by that toilet experience. But no time for reflection. Someone's dragging you toward a group of men in a circle. Their hands gesturing wildly. Their voices rising like a kettle about to boil. It's a philosophical debate. Hooray! You stand on the edge of the group, as an older man with a beard, so long it's practically a scarf, launches into a monologue about virtue. Or maybe truth. You're not totally sure because your ancient Greek is shaky and he keeps using metaphorical language that even the locals are squinting at. The speaker points to a tree and says something that translates loosely to, "Does the tree truly exist? Or do we merely believe in its treeness?" Someone claps. Someone else yawns. A third person is clearly asleep, but faking alertness by nodding every 30 seconds. The worst part, no one brought snacks. This isn't a lecture hall. It's more like standing in a TED Talk, given by a man who smells faintly of wine and onions, and who thinks rhetorical questions are a love language. Suddenly, they turn to you. They want your opinion. On what? You're not quite sure. Someone repeats the question slower. Can one be just without society? You panic and respond with something vague like, "Justice is, internal?" A few men nod. One coughs. A small boy throws a rock at a chicken and gets scolded for interrupting your insightful contribution. Someone actually starts clapping. You've passed the vibe check. The debate slowly dissolves into people making plans for the upcoming festival of Dionysus. Apparently, there will be wine, dancing, and someone dressed as a satyr who may or may not try to marry a shrub. You're politely invited, but also told to bring your own cushion, wine jug, and a few good jokes. No pressure. After the mental marathon of that philosophy circle, your stomach is now filing official complaints. You consider heading to a food stall. But that's not how meals work here. There are no restaurants. Maybe a street vendor selling chickpea fritters or dried figs. If you're lucky. Otherwise, you'll have to wait until the evening symposium, which, spoiler alert, is more wine than dinner. A child offers you a bite of boiled lupine beans. You accept, because hunger has made you reckless. They taste like chalk and bitterness. The child laughs and runs off. You've been duped by a 6-year-old. You sit on a stone step for a minute, trying not to pass out, trying not to think about the potsherd toilet, and wondering how anyone in history ever got anything done while this dehydrated and itchy. An old woman walks past muttering something about thunder omens and stares directly into your soul. You wave weakly. A stray dog sits next to you. He looks better fed than you, and seems to pity you in that wordless, canine way that says, "You really aren't cut out for this." Are you? And honestly, you're starting to agree. After your misadventures with mystery beans and moral philosophy, you finally drag yourself toward what seems like a quieter part of town. But don't get your hopes up, because now it's time for an ancient civic duty democracy. Sounds empowering. Right. Except in Athens. It basically means a full day of yelling in the sun with hundreds of other men, each more determined than the last to be heard over the chorus of grumbling stomachs and mid-afternoon farts. You wander into the Pnyx, the rocky hill where Athenian citizens gather to vote and shout about laws, taxes, and grain prices. If you're a woman, a foreigner, a slave, or just a man under 30, congrats, you are legally invisible here. For everyone else, it's a chaotic, open-air, free-for-all. There's no orderly queue, no ballot booths, and definitely no soft-spoken civic volunteers handing you an "I voted" sticker. Instead, you join a mob of roughly 6,000 sweaty men packed shoulder to shoulder, waving their arms and arguing at full volume, like it's a very aggressive family reunion with too much wine and not enough olives. The presiding official raises a hand. Silence, nope. Just slightly more focused yelling. A man wearing a faded Himation clambers onto a stone platform and starts proposing a new grain import tax. He's immediately booed. Another proposes giving state pay to jurors. More booing. Then someone suggests reallocating funds from the Navy to the theater festival and accidentally incites a miniature riot. You try to keep up, but it's like watching a modern political debate where everyone has a megaphone and the moderator gave up hours ago. Occasionally, someone throws shade by referencing Homeric heroes. One man yells, "This proposal is more foolish than Achilles without his sandals," which honestly feels like a deep cut. You nod approvingly, pretending to understand. Eventually, voting happens not with pens or buttons, but with pebbles or broken pottery shards. That's right. If you support something, you drop one kind of stone into a jar. If you oppose it, you drop another, counting them, manual, and sometimes manipulated. Historians still argue whether this system truly empowered citizens or just amplified whoever could shout loudest and bribe best. Speaking of manipulation, you overhear one man offer another a free goat sausage in exchange for a favorable vote. That's ancient Greek lobbying. Folks, greasier, but just as shady. By now, you're tired, sunburned, and regretting not bringing a flask of diluted wine like everyone else. You feel a bit faint and try to sit down, but immediately realize you're in someone's vomit splash zone. You decide standing is better. A small fight breaks out over a dropped scroll. Someone's tunic gets ripped. A philosophical insult is hurled that roughly translates to, "Your logic is as unsound as Pythagoras' diet." Ouch. Somehow, through the noise and chaos, a vote actually passes. Something about new drainage in the harbor district. People cheer. You have no idea what just happened. But you cheer too. Just in case someone thinks you're a Spartan spy. That's a thing. By the way, if people don't like your political vibe, they can literally vote to exile you from the city for 10 years. It's called ostracism. And It's both democratic and petty. 1 year. They exiled a guy just because he was too rich and threw parties people were jealous of. After the vote, the crowd disperses in clumps, some heading toward the marketplace, others toward the temples, and a few toward shade and naps. You follow a group hoping for water, or at least shade. Instead, they lead you to yet another gathering. This one more intimate but equally chaotic, a philosophy workshop. This time, a younger man named Demetrios is teaching a group of curious teenagers about virtue ethics. You don't know what that means. And frankly, neither do they. He draws shapes in the dirt with a stick and says things like, "The soul is geometric." You contemplate faking an emergency, maybe pretending to be stung by a bee, but then realize you have no idea what ancient Greek bees look like or how dramatic they are. Instead, you fake interest. Demetrios asks a rhetorical question. Can a man who steals bread to feed his family be just before anyone answers? A small voice pipes up. What if he stole honey cakes? Demetrios nods solemnly, as if this changes everything. You feel a sneeze coming, and panic because interrupting a philosopher mid-thought is apparently bad form. You stifle the sneeze. Your eyes water. Your nose burns. Your dignity is barely intact. After the lesson, one of the teens offers you a fig. You accept with the kind of reverence usually reserved for holy relics. It's mushy, sweet, and the best thing you've tasted all day. Then the teen tells you they found it on the ground. You chew slower, reconsidering your life choices. And just as you're wiping fig goo off your chin, someone mentions that gymnasium is about to start. Not a class. Oh no. An actual gym session. You shudder involuntarily. You've heard rumors, and those rumors involve a lot of sweat and zero clothing. You're being dragged willingly or not toward the gymnasium. But don't picture treadmills, protein shakes, or gentle Pilates stretches. In ancient Greece, the gymnasium is less boutique, fitness club, and more nudity, sand, and bruises. You walk into a sprawling courtyard surrounded by columns, where men of all ages are oiled up and either stretching, wrestling, or arguing over which philosopher had better abs. The first thing that hits you is the smell. A cocktail of sweat, olive oil, and old leather slaps you in the face like a particularly judgmental sandal. Everyone is stark naked, except for a few trainers in cloaks. And you're the only one trying to maintain eye contact. It's hard to focus on conversational ethics when the man beside you is casually lunging in your peripheral vision, and his anatomy is taking more airspace than it should. The floor's made of packed dirt and sand, which clings to oiled limbs like a crusty seasoning. There's a section for discus, another for javelin, and then the wrestling pit, because what says physical education like full-body grappling with strangers in broad daylight? You're offered some oil from a clay flask. You hesitate, but apparently, this is non-negotiable. A trainer gives you a once-over and hands you a strigil, the curved metal scraper used to remove sweat, dirt, and excess oil. There's no soap, just lube and scraping. It's less spa and more industrial cleaning. You try to blend in by stretching, but you accidentally mimic a statue of Hermes and immediately draw attention. Someone asks what city-state you're from. You blurt Atlantis and immediately regret it. A few people laugh, but one older man narrows his eyes and mutters something about Persian sympathizers. You decide to keep a low profile. Then comes wrestling. You're expected to pair off, lock arms, and attempt to slam each other into the dirt while avoiding dislocating a shoulder. It's less about points and more about ego. And let's be honest, you're wildly unprepared. Your opponent, a teen named Nicandros, has the muscle tone of a demigod and the patience of a particularly aggressive goose. He tackles you within 5 seconds. Your face meets sand. You're not even mad, just surprised your nose didn't break. You get up, try again, and end up in a headlock that feels like being hugged by a bronze statue. As you choke politely, you recall that this was once considered essential education for male citizens. Gymnasium wasn't just for fitness. It was where boys learned virtue, disciplina, and how to not scream in public while being crushed. Historians still argue whether these athletic practices were more about developing moral character or simply a socially acceptable excuse for oiled-up power moves. You tap out and crawl away. A kind man offers you watered-down wine, which you gulp like it's electrolytes. He tells you his name is Timon and explains that physical perfection is sacred here like a tribute to the gods. A healthy body honors Apollo, he says. You nod, even as you notice someone across the courtyard with a pulled hamstring and an expression that says, Apollo has betrayed him. Then it's time for Koriko's training, punching a suspended leather sack. You try, but your form is all wrong. A trainer yells advice that translates to, punch like you mean it. You try again. The sack sways politely. After an hour of failing, and being thoroughly exfoliated by airborne grit, the session wraps up with communal scraping. Everyone lines up to clean themselves with strigils and a powder made from ash and crushed herbs. You're handed a second strigil because apparently your oil-to-dust ratio is a public concern. You scrape, wince, and try not to think about hygiene. The strigils are shared. There's no disinfectant. One guy sneezes into his elbow and keeps scraping. You consider whether the gods accept modern-day prayers. As you shuffle toward the exit, a trainer pats your back and tells you to work on your form and your thighs. He adds, they're very tentative. You thank him. Somehow, outside, you feel a breeze for the first time in what feels like decades. Your skin is raw, your pride brised, and your tunic, now full of sand, you'll be finding for days. The sun's dipping lower now, casting long golden shadows over the courtyard. You're allowed to get dressed again, thankfully, but you realize your tunic has been used as a cushion by someone else. There's a faint outline of a bottom and a fig stain. You put it on anyway. As you walk away, aching and slightly traumatized, someone calls out to remind you that the symposium starts after sundown. Bring yolks, they say again, and wine, and try not to fall asleep this time. You nod, unsure if they're joking. Probably not. But before that chaotic wine-fueled marathon begins, you need to collect yourself. Maybe splash water on your face. Maybe reevaluate every decision that led to you doing naked lunges in ancient dust with a man named Nicandros. You find a cistern near the agora and lean over it, splashing cool water on your cheeks. A child throws a rock into it behind you, splattering your entire tunic. You're too tired to care. The city is shifting now, preparing for evening. Torches are being lit. Vendors call out their final offers. A man shouts about a missing goat. Another shouts back that the goat was always missing. It's just that no one noticed. You're still sticky, still sore, and still probably not allowed to vote, but at least you've survived gymnasium. Barely. And now, it's party time. Sort of. You arrive at the symposium, just as the first stars blink to life overhead, and the moon rises like a polished silver plate hanging lazily in the sky. You're exhausted, sore, and a little bit dusty in places you'd rather not discuss, but there's wine here. And cushions. So already, this feels like progress. The host, Eshaba Merchant, Nam Lucendros, greets you with the kind of half-smile that says, I invited too many people. And you're probably one of the extras. Still, he waves you in. You step through a narrow doorway into an andron, the men's room. But not in the restroom sense. This is where the symposium happens. Low couches line the walls. Clay lamps flicker in alcoves. And the air smells of incense, roasted chestnuts, and ambition. Before you even sit down, someone hands you a kylix, a shallow wine cup with painted scenes of dancing, satyrs, and drunk gods doing questionable things. The wine thick, grittu, and aggressively diluted. Greek custom dictates mixing water into wine, drinking it, undiluted. That's considered barbaric. Something only Spartans or weird poets would do. You find a spot on a cushion that doesn't look too stained and try to recline like you belong. But reclining is an art form here. Too stiff, and you look uptight. Too casual, and you might accidentally kick someone's amphora. You settle on an awkward lean that makes your hip cramp, but feels socially safe. A slave boy moves through the room offering bites of honeyed figs and toasted barley cakes. You reach for one, but it's intercepted by a man with dramatic eyebrows who says, "That one's mine." You apologize. He waves it off, then spends the next 20 minutes telling a story about how he once convinced a Spartan commander that goats could predict the weather. The host calls for silence well, semi-silence, and claps his hands. It's time for the symposiarch, the evening's wine master, to lay down the rules. Tonight's theme, love, and its many forms. Oh boy. The wine starts flowing faster, and so do the speeches. Men take turns, standing or dramatically staying, reclined and delivering odes. Arguments, and deeply personal rants about affection, désir, and which minor god was the worst at dating. Someone quotes Sappho badly. Another insists that true love only exists between teacher and student. A third just sings a song about his favorite goat, which raises more questions than it answers. You nod along, sipping slowly, too much too fast, and you'll be singing goat songs too. Historians still argue whether these symposia were more intellectual salons or just ancient frat parties with better vocabulary. Probably both. Because just when you're lulled into thinking this might be a sophisticated evening, someone starts a drinking game involving fig pits and a bronze bowl. It's called kotobos, and it's basically wine pong. But you have to fling the dregs of your cup across the room and try to hit a target while chanting the name of your crush, miss. And everyone heckles you. Hit it. and you get to look smug for the next hour. You try. You miss. Dramatically, the pit clinks off the side of the bowl and lands in someone's sandal. Laughter ensues. You raise your cup in defeat. The music begins, not lyres and flutes this time, but a single flute played by a woman hired for the evening. She plays with her eyes closed, swaying gently, and the room shifts into a more dreamy mood. Someone recites a tragic poem about love lost at sea. Another recites one about catching his wife eating the last olive. Same tone, different stakes. Food appears again: roasted fish, soft cheese, pickled onions, and something that might be eel. You eat cautiously. Every bite is either divine or confusing. You bite into a pastry filled with honey and sesame seeds and nearly tear up. It's the best thing you've had all day. Then, a man next to you sneezes into the wine jug, and the magic fades. Conversations splinter into smaller clusters. One group debates whether cats are sacred. Another discusses dreams. You eavesdrop on a man explaining that he once saw a ghost on the Acropolis who smelled like onions and demanded he switch professions. "So I became a cobbler," he says, very seriously. A few guests have passed out. One is snoring into a bowl of lentils. Another is trying to recite a Homeric verse but keeps replacing words with the names of cheeses. You start feeling drowsy. 2. The wine is warm in your belly. Your eyes are heavy. Someone offers you a cushion with fewer crumbs. You accept like it's an award, but sleep isn't on the schedule yet. The host claps again, this time announcing the arrival of a riddle contest. Loser drinks. Winner also drinks. That's democracy for you. The riddles are ridiculous. What walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs at dusk? You know this one. Oedipus. Easy. But someone shouts a drunk crab, and the room erupts into applause anyway. Next comes a round of impersonations. Someone does a shockingly good impression of a tax collector. Someone else pretends to be an olive merchant with a speech impediment. You're pressured into participating. You impersonate the goat you saw earlier. It gets moderate laughs and 1-2 real bah from across the room. By the time the fire burns low and the flute player is yawning, the room has thinned. Some guests have left. Others are curled up in corners. You're somewhere between tipsy and time traveler's remorse. But before you can even consider dozing off, someone taps your shoulder and says, "You're on bread duty tomorrow." You blink. Bread duty. But they're already snoring, and you're already wondering what horrors that involves. Bread duty begins before dawn, before the roosters crow, before your soul even fully re-enters your body. You're woken by someone banging a stick against the courtyard stones and shouting something about yeast vengeance, which feels alarmingly specific. Your head is pounding from last night's symposium, a wine fog mixed with regret and sesame seeds. You sit up too fast and immediately regret everything. The bakery is tucked near the edge of the agora, close enough to smell fish and far enough to avoid surprise taxes. When you arrive, a burly woman named Melita hands you a heavy wooden paddle and says, "Don't mess up the crust." You nod solemnly, even though you have absolutely no idea what that means. Inside, it's warm, the kind of comforting heat that might be nice if you weren't sweating wine and fear. The oven is a dome of stone. still radiating from the coals, banked overnight. Melita shows you the dough sour-smelling, sticky, and possibly alive. Your job is simple. Shape it. Slash it. Slide it in. You try. Your first loaf ends up looking like a deflated melon. The second sticks to the peel and folds in half like it's shy. Melita doesn't even yell. She just exhales through her nose and mutters something about new hands. You finally get one right, sort of. She lets it go in the oven with the others. You watch as steam escapes from the mouth of the dome, and the air fills with the smell of browning crust and toasted grain. It's heavenly. For a fleeting moment, you understand why people write poems about bread. Then a man bursts in shouting about his wife being possessed by a baking spirit and demanding a blessed loaf. You offer him one of your sad ones. He leaves satisfied. You're not sure who got swindled. Backbreaking work continues. More loaves. More sweat. Occasionally, someone brings in a pot of olives or a hunk of cheese to trade. One boy tries to pay with a song. Melita gives him a bread crust and a long stare. By mid-morning, your arms ache. Your tunic smells like yeast. You've inhaled more flour than any human should. And there's dough in your ear. But people line up for bread like it's gold. Even crusty, slightly burnt loaves disappear fast. A small girl with missing teeth tells you yours taste like her grandma's kisses. You don't ask questions. A traveling merchant tells you that in Sparta, bread is black and made with blood. You think he's joking, but he's not. Spartan cuisine was famously unkind. Historians still argue whether it was a form of culinary stoicism or just very bad taste. Melita gives you a fig and says you didn't entirely ruin things. High praise. You consider a career change until she makes you sweep ash and chase a rat. The rat wins. After the last loaf cools, you're free to go. You stagger out of the bakery blinking like a mole into the noon sun. Your hair is crisp with flour dust. Your eyes sting. And your hands are covered in tiny burns that feel like history giving you little souvenirs. The agora is bustling again. Same merchants. Same shouting. Same fig sellers with their suspiciously sticky fingers. You duck into a shaded portico and sit beside a sculptor chiseling a statue of a bearded man with an impressively large nose. He doesn't look up but mutters, "Don't touch the nose." You weren't going to. Probably. Art is everywhere in Athens. Even in the mess. Vases with wild illustrations. Statues with missing limbs. Frescoes flaking in alleyways. You wander past a temple wall decorated with colorful terracotta plaques, people's prayers immortalized in clay. One shows a man holding a pig by the tail. Another has what appears to be a divine figure, offering someone a banana. It's probably not a banana, but the shape is suspicious. Nearby, a group of children chases a hoop with sticks and nearly crashes into a man holding a lyre. He swears in Ionian and then begins tuning the strings with great drama. You sit to watch him perform. The tune is haunting slow, lilting, full of little twangs and intentional pauses. A crowd forms. Someone tosses him a handful of lentils. You glance up and realize the sun's moving again. Time in ancient Greece is slippery. There are no clocks. Just shadows and stomachs. Yours rumbles. Again. So, you start making your way toward the outskirts where the fields are. You pass old men playing a game with dice and pebbles. One shouts that his role was divinely guided. The other spits and says the gods have terrible aim. As you pass a house, a woman throws a bucket of water into the street and nearly drenches you. She shrugs. For the dust, she says. Sure, you finally make it to a small grove where olives grow in neat rows, their silver-green leaves shimmering in the breeze. A boy is picking them one by one, humming. He offers you one. You bite into it and instantly regret it. It's bitter, unripe, and full of spite. He laughs. You have to cure them first. Right. You sit under the shade of an olive tree, lean back against the trunk, and close your eyes. The breeze hums. Somewhere, someone is singing off-key. A goat sneezes, and just as you think you might get a proper nap, someone pokes you in the ribs and whispers, "Temple duty. You're on incense shift." Of course you are. Temple duty sound noble. Like something where you wear a robe and maybe wave a feather fan while muttering cryptic wisdom. But as with all things in ancient Greece, reality is much smokier and involves way more goat fat than you'd prefer. You arrive at the temple of Athena Polius perched high on the Acropolis. And it is, to be fair, breathtaking. Massive marble columns soar skyward like frozen thunderbolts. The scent of laurel, ash, and warm limestone hangs in the air. People murmur reverently or stand in hushed lines, waiting to offer garlands, coins, or unfortunate poultry. Your role incense shift. A priest with eyebrows like twin caterpillars explains that you must keep the incense fires going while wafting the smoke toward the statue of the goddess. Make her happy, he says. Not too smoky, not too faint. Just divina. Easy. Right. The incense is a mixture of crushed myrrh, powdered herbs, and some resin that smells like burnt cinnamon and spicy bark. You sprinkle it into a small bronze bowl, nestled in hot coals. Smoke billows up immediately, curling through the air like lazy snakes. You waft it toward the ivory and gold statue of Athena, who stares eternally ahead with a gaze that says, "Don't mess this up." You try to keep a rhythm sprinkle. Waft. Dow. But then someone sneezes directly into the coals and nearly sets their chitin on fire. You react instinctively, accidentally dumping an entire scoop of incense at once. The smoke goes from mystical swirl to full-on infernal fog. The priest squints through the haze, coughs, and says nothing. Passive-aggressive silence is clearly sacred here. A procession enters the temple dancers in dyed robes, musicians with flutes, and one man who seems to think banging cymbals loudly is a spiritual act. They circle the altar, chant, and throw flower petals. One lands in the incense bowl and sizzles. You pretend it was intentional. Worship in ancient Greece is less about solemn prayer and more about spectacle. Sacrifices are made, not symbolic ones. Real animals. Today it's a goat. You politely excuse yourself from the splash zone, deciding that this is not the moment to test your resilience. Historians still argue whether animal sacrifice was mainly spiritual or more of a social performance wrapped in religious pretenses. Either way, it smells awful. The goat is burned. Prayers are said, and the priests read the smoke and entrails for signs from the gods. One declares it a favorable omen. Another squints at a lobe and mutters. Could be indigestion. You return to your incense, now clumped into blackened gravel. You scrape it out and start over. A child sneaks in and tries to touch the statue. You hiss at him like a cat. He giggles and runs off. Trailing olive pits. Outside the temple, you spot a group of citizens leaving tiny votive offerings, miniature terracotta limbs, eyes, ears. They're symbols of prayers for healing. If your knee hurts, you offer a model knee. If your sight is failing, a ceramic eyeball. There's a small pile of disembodied parts that look like the goddess is assembling a very low-budget Frankenstein. Back inside, your incense burns low, and your legs are stiff from standing. A woman enters bearing a basket of honey cakes for the altar. She locks eyes with you and says, "Don't let them steal one this time." You nod solemnly. But then a monkey, yes, a literal monkey, darts in, grabs a cake, and escapes through a side door before you can even move. You blink. No one else reacts. Maybe this is normal. You step outside during a lull, inhaling relatively fresh air for the first time in hours. Below the temple, Athens sprawls out in dusky gold and dusty rooftops. The agora buzzes. Birds wheel through the sky. Someone shouts about missing sandals. Again, you sit on the temple steps and watch a street performer juggle clay cups while balancing on a goat. He wobbles. The goat looks unbothered. A group of teenagers nearby is reenacting a famous myth using sock puppets made from old sandals. It's deeply inaccurate, and somehow still compelling. You're just beginning to relax when a temple servant informs you it's time for the evening libation. That means more wine, more smoke, and another round of prayers. You return to the altar, light a fresh offering, and pour a measured amount of wine into a bowl while murmuring a formulaic phrase to Athena. Bright-eyed, guardian of the city, accept this gift. The wine hisses as it hits the coals. A plume of smoke curls up and mercifully doesn't set off anyone's asthma this time. The night settles around the temple like a soft blanket. Lamps flicker. The statue of Athena glows in the lamplight. Eerily lifelike and distant at the same time. You feel small here, less like a person, more like a brief breath in a city that keeps inhaling. As the final worshippers file out and the priest extinguishes the flames, you help sweep the stone floor. There are flower petals, ash, sandal scuffs, and one half-eaten honey cake. The monkey didn't finish. You leave it as an offering to whatever minor god manages leftovers. The priest nods at you. Not the worst incense shift I've seen. High praise. Again, you head down the steps, your legs aching, your tunic smelling of resin and regret. The streets are quieter now, lit by flickering torches and the occasional moonbeam. You pass a drunk man serenading a fig tree and a cat sitting on a statue of Hermes like it owns the place. It probably does. And just when you think the night might be over, someone grabs your sleeve and says, "Cours du thé. At sunrise. Don't be late." You stare into the middle distance and wonder if Athena accepts prayers for extended naps. Dawn hasn't even rubbed the crust from its eyes yet. And already, the court square is buzzing like a beehive full of angry philosophers. You shuffle in, bleary-eyed and sore from temple duty, hoping that court duty is code for sitting quietly while someone else makes bad decisions. But no, this is Athens. You are expected to participate. You find yourself at the Heliaea, Athens' massive public court. It's less of a building and more of a sun-drenched chaos pit, surrounded by marble columns and bad moods. Around 500 to 1. 000. Citizens are crammed onto long wooden benches, fanning themselves with wax tablets and muttering about overdue goat taxes. Everyone's male. Everyone's over-caffeinated. And no one seems to know exactly what's on trial today. A clerk with the world's bushiest unibrow announces the charges. A merchant has accused his neighbor of selling spoiled fish and calling him a spawn of Medusa's armpit. Defamation and fraud. Serious stuff. There's no judge. By the way, just a jury of hundreds and the raw power of democratic squabbling. Imagine jury duty with no training, no bathroom breaks, and a strong likelihood of being yelled at by someone with a philosophy degree and anger management issues. The accuser steps forward. He's sweating profusely and holding a gutted fish like it's Exhibit A. He accuses the defendant of selling it 4 days past freshness and swears the smell made his cousin faint. The crowd murmurs. One man dramatically sniffs the fish from 10 feet away and recoils as if possessed. The defendant responds with his own flair. He insists the fish was aged, not rotten, and accuses the accuser of being a known liar with a face like spoiled yogurt. Gasps all around. A woman in the back yells, "He does look like yogurt," before being politely escorted away since women aren't technically allowed in here unless they're witnesses or dramatic plot twists. You're handed 2 bronze tokens, one for guilty, one for not guilty. You're supposed to cast your vote discreetly in a clay jar once the speeches are over. Of course, discreetly is a generous word when everyone is literally watching everyone else. Peer pressure is thick in the air. So is the smell of dried anchovies. Historians still argue whether this jury system created true fairness or just the illusion of it. On one hand, every citizen gets a say. On the other, verdicts are often swayed by clever rhetoric, flashy bribes, or fish-based theatrics. It's like legal karaoke, where whoever performs best wins. The accuser ends with tears and a quote from Hesiod. The defendant counters with a poem of his own, half-remembered and mostly off-topic. Then he juggles olives for no apparent reason. It's not clear if that helps or hurts his case. The jury votes. You drop your token into the not guilty jar, mostly because you're afraid of fish revenge. The verdict, guilty. The crowd cheers. The fish is thrown ceremoniously into a pit. Justice. But there's no time to rest. Another trial begins immediately, this one about a stolen cloak. Or maybe a stolen joke. It's hard to hear over the shouting. One man is accusing another of plagiarism, claiming he heard his joke about Hera's sandals used at a dinner party without credit. The defendant insists the joke was public domain. A witness is called a flute player who may or may not have been sober at the time. You begin to realize that ancient Greek courts are less about truth and more about storytelling. Whoever crafts the best narrative wins. Today's defendant even uses props, a broken sandal, a lyre, and a small chicken wearing a flower crown. Don't ask. It's performance art now. As mid-morning melts into noon, you're sunburned, hungry, and completely tangled in civic duty. A man behind you falls asleep, snoring into his tunic. Another doodles what looks like a centaur doing taxes A breeze picks up, scattering someone's court notes into the sky like tragic confetti. You're finally dismissed, just as someone begins shouting about lost barley shipments. You slink away toward the shade. Dodging, a man selling lukewarm goat milk, and another trying to trade blessed pebbles. You consider a pebble. You decline, to recover. You head for a public fountain, one of Athens' few luxuries. Cool water trickles from a lion-head spout, and you lean in gratefully. A child beats you to it, sticking his whole face in. You wait your turn. Someone recognizes you from bread duty. "Hey," they say, still putting rocks in the crust. You smile awkwardly and pretend that was a deliberate technique. The rest of the afternoon unravels into small errands. You help a potter carry his wares to the agora. One breaks. He blames the gods. You help a shepherd gather runaway sheep. One bites you. No one blames the gods. You deliver a message to a philosopher who refuses to read it because writing corrupts memory. You leave it under a rock and walk away. The city pulses around you. Men in cloaks argue over taxes. Artists paint amphorae with scenes of gods doing scandalous things. Vendors shout about the virtues of their lentils. A group of teenagers reenacts a myth where a cucumber is mistaken for a divine sign. It's unclear if this is satire or education. By the time the sun slants low again, casting gold across marble and stone, your feet are blistered, and your patience thinner than a symposium wine mix. You return to your sleeping quarters, a wooden pallet stuffed with straw and collapse. You're asleep in seconds, until someone shakes you awake, whispering, "Gymnasium again tomorrow," oiled up by sunrise. Of course, the second trip to the gymnasium is no easier than the first, though this time, you at least know to brace for nudity and unsolicited motivational advice. The sun is barely peeking over the rooftops when you arrive. Tunic slung over one shoulder. Sandals full of grit. Soul full of dread. The courtyard is already alive, with the slap of bare feet against dirt. The wet squeak of strigils scraping yesterday's mistakes off toned limbs. And the occasional shout of "lift with the knees." Not the knees. You, lunatic. A man near the entrance is arguing with a trainer over whether wrestling counts as cardio. You don't wait for the conclusion. Today's session is focused on pygmachia, that's right. Boxing. Ancient Greek style. No gloves. Just leather thongs wrapped around your knuckles. A strong jawline. And a prayer to Hermes that you won't leave with your teeth in your pocket. Your opponent this time is a wiry man named Hecamon, whose chest hair seems to form a map of the Aegean Sea, and whose idea of a warm-up involves aggressively punching a tree. You gulp. The rules: there are no rounds, no time limits, and technically, no mercy. The match ends when one of you gives up or can't stand. It's less about winning and more about proving you can endure pain with style. Ancient Greek resilience training. Basically, the bell well. It's more of a shouted, "Now rings out." And Hecamon lunges at you like an angry wasp with fists. You dodge once, twice, then trip over your own foot and land face first in the sand. Classic. To his credit, Hecamon helps you up, then punches you lightly in the shoulder. Friendly warning. He says, "I once knocked out my cousin so hard, he forgot his own name." You nod, like that's normal. The match continues. You manage a few jabs. Nothing elegant, but respectable. Hikamon grins, then lands a blow squarely on your upper arm, which goes instantly numb. The crowd claps. Someone throws a fig. It hits you in the back of the head. You wish it had been wine. Eventually, the trainer calls it, you're not technically unconscious, but you've achieved that spiritual state between pride and a nosebleed. You stagger to the side and collapse near the olive oil jars, where an old man pats your shoulder and tells you, it's the spirit that matters. Then, he adds, but you really should keep your hands up. As you cool down, if you take in the scene around you, there's a man practicing discus in the corner who accidentally lets go too early and nearly takes out a pillar. A boy is climbing a statue of Heracles to retrieve a sandal. And, in the far corner, someone is demonstrating a form of ancient stretching that involves more grunting than movement. After oiling down and giving yourself a half-hearted scrape, you gather your things and limp toward the exit. A goat blocks your path, stares directly into your soul, and finally moves. You consider this a victory. Wandering through the agora afterward, you spot a commotion near the stoa. A street performer is reenacting the Battle of Marathon using puppets made of figs and tiny bits of papyrus. His Persian general sounds suspiciously like a drunk uncle, and the Athenian soldier is voiced like a melodramatic bard. The crowd loves it. You linger, laughing, until someone offers you a date cake. You accept. It's warm, sticky, and slightly burnt. Perfection. But rest doesn't last long. A man in an official-looking robe grabs your elbow and says, "You've been summoned." You ask. To where he says, "To the Thalos. We need jurors for a cattle theft case and a witness to last week's olive-related slander incident." You'll do. You're not sure which part of that you're being called for, but you follow. The Tholos is a round council building, used by the Prytanis, a rotating group of citizens responsible for running the day-to-day business of Athens. Think City Hall. If City Hall had couches and random food fights, you're asked to give a statement about a neighbor's claim that someone insulted his prized olive tree. He called it shriveled, the plaintiff exclaims. Pointing dramatically, the accused denies everything. A witness says the word used was actually distinguished. Historians still argue whether Athenians were more passionate about personal honor or olive groves. Honestly, it's a tie. Your testimony is vague, mostly about overhearing something while feeding a goat. The council nods as if you've solved a crime. Someone gives you a barley biscuit as thanks. On your way out, a philosopher corners you and asks, "What is justice?" "Really?" you say, "Not getting punched by Hecamon," and walk faster. By late afternoon, you're back at your sleeping pallet, nursing your bruises with a damp cloth and a distant stare. But just as you begin to drift, a flute starts playing outside. A procession is forming for a religious feast. You can hear the chants, the jingling of bells, and the clatter of hoofbeats. Because tonight, as luck would have it, is the beginning of the Panathenaia, Athens' biggest festival. Firelight, music, sacrifices, dancing. You're expected to show up, help carry torches, and maybe participate in a reenactment of the city's founding. And you still haven't eaten dinner? You sit up, sigh, and mutter to yourself, "Just don't let them put me in another goat costume." You make it to the Panathenaic festival just as the first flames of the torch procession flicker to life. The air is thick with smoke, roasted meat, flower garlands, and anticipation. The whole city's buzzing like a kicked beehive. But in a celebratory way, draped banners ripple above the streets. Lyre strings hum in the distance. And people are dancing with the kind of energy only achievable through sheer civic pride and fermented beverages. You, naturally, have been assigned a torch. It's heavier than it looks and drips hot wax directly onto your foot. You try not to scream. A man beside you, bare-chested, wearing what appears to be a helmet made of fig leaves, grins and says, "First time you nod." He chuckles ominously. The torch relay begins, winding its way up toward the Acropolis. It's symbolic, an offering of flame to Athena, patron of the city, goddess of wisdom, war, and terrifying statues. The runners ahead of you pass the torch hand to hand like it's a sacred Olympic baton. You trip over a pebble and almost light a teenage boy's hair on fire. He glares. You apologize. The flame, miraculously, survives. You eventually reach the temple steps, breathless and wax-splattered. The final torchbearer bounds up to the altar, lights the ceremonial brazier, and the crowd erupts in cheers. Trumpets sound. Someone bangs a tambourine like it owes them money. Then comes the sacrifice. Don't worry. It's not a person, just a very unlucky bull, decorated in ribbons and fig branches, who looks around like he's reading the script and doesn't like where it's headed. The priests chant. The axe falls. The crowd goes reverently quiet. And soon the scent of fresh meat mixes with incense, perfume, and that ever-present undercurrent of unwashed sandals. This is followed by a grand feast. At last, real food. Tables groan under the weight of roast lamb, barley loaves, sweet wine, salted fish, and trays of golden cheese. You grab a plate, hold your breath, and dive in. You're halfway through a wedge of sharp feta when someone hands you a fig-stuffed pastry and calls you Torch Guy. It's a nickname you can live with. Nearby, a group performs a Pyrrhic dance, a war dance, all stomping feet, clashing shields, and rhythmic shouting. It's oddly hypnotic, like watching a fight and a ballet have a very aggressive baby. One dancer trips, turns it into a roll, and pops up like it was intentional. The crowd cheers. The festival continues through the night. There are poetry contests, chariot races, singing competitions where everyone is wildly off-key, and a woman who claims to channel Athena by reciting tax codes in a trance. People gather around her like she's a rock star. Historians still argue whether the Panathenaia was primarily religious devotion or an excuse to party with bureaucratic flair. The answer is likely both. You're pulled into a circle of revelers and urged to sing. You choose the only song you know, half of which is just humming and mumbling. Somehow, it becomes a hit. People clap. A man offers to paint your portrait. You politely decline. Later, a storyteller begins weaving tales by firelight. He speaks of Athena's birth from Zeus's forehead fully armed and shouting. He tells of the city's founding myth, where Poseidon offered a saltwater spring, and Athena gave the olive tree. And we chose the olive. He says, because salt water is mostly good for ruining shoes. The crowd laughs. You do too. The firelight dances across marble and faces, casting long shadows that flicker like ghostly dancers along the temple walls. For a moment, time feels suspended, like you're not a sweaty, sore time traveler with goat-related trauma, but a genuine citizen of Athens, caught in the heartbeat of something ancient and wild and inexplicably joyful. A girl passes by balancing a tray of honey cakes on her head. A child runs past covered in paint and glitter. Someone nearby is composing a love poem to a particularly crunchy piece of toast. Eventually, the music fades into softer melodies. People recline under trees or along temple steps, wine in hand, heads resting on each other's shoulders. The stars above are sharp and clear, untouched by smog or streetlight. A soft wind stirs the banners, and you hear distant laughter low. Tired and content, you lie back against a stone bench, full for the first time in days. Your tunic is stained with oil, honey, and questionable wine. Your feet are blistered. Your hair smells like cedar smoke, and your hands are sticky from baklava. But you don't care. A priest walks by, humming to himself. Good festival. He murmurs. No one fell in the fire this year. Small victories. And just as you're drifting off, a voice near your ear whispers, tomorrow we visit the doctor. You don't even flinch anymore. Morning brings no mercy. You wake up on the same stone bench you passed out on. Cheek imprinted with a relief carving of a horse's backside. Your mouth tastes like honey cake and regret. Someone has left a single olive on your chest, possibly as a gift, or a warning. You can't tell. You stretch, wince, and begin the slow shuffle toward Athens' equivalent of a clinic, the home of a physician named Diodoros, whose claim to fame is that he once lanced a boil shaped like the island of Rhodes. You're not sure if that's impressive or disgusting, probably both. The clinic is modest, tucked behind a potter's stall and partially shaded by a very aggressive fig tree. Inside, the air is thick with herbal smoke, dried roots hanging from rafters, and a general sense of improvised medicine. Diodoros greets you with stained fingers, a crooked smile, and eyes that say, I've seen some things. Strip, he says casually. You hesitate. He sighs. Fine. At least, show me the bruises. You pull back your tunic and reveal a full constellation of gymnasium souvenirs. Diodoros pokes at your ribs, hums thoughtfully, and mutters. Could be humors. Could be the gods. Greek medicine is a mix of trial and error, old wives' tales, and theories from Hippocrates, the so-called father of modern medicine. His big idea that the body is governed by 4 fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If one's out of balance, you're doomed. The cure, usually something unpleasant. Diodoros examines your tongue, sniffs your breath, and declares your spleen moody. His solution, a concoction of boiled cabbage water, fennel, vinegar, and possibly despair. You drink it. It tastes like regret, seasoned with swamp. Then comes the real fun cupping therapy. He takes small clay bowls, heats them over a flame, and then places them onto your skin to draw out the bad. You yelp. He tells you to stop being dramatic. You suggest he try it. He says he already has. Didn't work. He adds cheerfully, next is bloodletting. Of course. He brandishes a small bronze lancet and heads for your forearm. You flinch. He rolls his eyes and slices a tiny nick, enough to let a few drops trickle into a shallow bowl. There, he says. Much better. Historians still argue whether bloodletting ever actually helped or just gave patients a head start on fainting. Either way, it was popular and messy. You lie on a stiff mat while Diodoros prepares a poultice for your sore knee-goat fat. Crushed garlic. And what might be basil. He slaps it on like he's buttering toast. Leave it for an hour, he says, unless ants come. While you marinate in herbhoutcho, you watch other patients drift in and out. An old woman with a crick in her neck. A boy with a suspicious rash. A man convinced his stomach pain is caused by divine punishment for mocking a statue. Diodoros listens to them all, with equal parts, skepticism and vague encouragement. One young man arrives clutching his jaw. Tooth. He groans. Diodoros nods, solemnly, opens a drawer, and removes a pair of terrifying bronze tongs. You avert your eyes. There's a yelp, a loud squelch, and a victorious shout. Got it. To celebrate, the patient is handed a small honey cake. You assume it's to prevent him from telling the others. As the day wears on, Diodoros offers you a scroll to read while you recover. It's a treatise on flatulence and its connection to melancholy. You skim it. There are diagrams. One is labeled angry intestine. You gently place it down. Eventually, you're allowed to leave. Patched, scraped, and faintly smelling like an overcooked stew. Diodoros waves you off. Come back if the pus returns. You make your way back through the agora, where someone immediately asks if you've been possessed by a swamp spirit. You say no, but you do need a nap. Badly. You pass a group of philosophers mid-argument. One insists that sleep is a form of cowardice. Another declares that only fools nap before sunset. A third is snoring against a column. You duck into a quiet alley, slump against a warm wall, and let your eyelids flutter shut. For 5 whole minutes, nothing happens. Then you're shaken awake by a messenger boy with a lazy eye and a scroll. You've been invited, he says breathlessly, to a marriage negotiation. Of course you have, because in Athens, personal health is optional. But social obligations never sleep. You're marched from your peaceful nap straight into the middle of an awkward, sandal-squeaking marriage negotiation. The messenger boy leads you through twisting streets that reek of garlic, goat, dung, and floral perfume, because nothing says romantic contract like conflicting aromas and mild dehydration. You arrive at a modest oikos, or household, where everyone is already assembled. The bride's father, the groom's father, 2 uncles who appear to be arguing about sheep dowries, and one very bored scribe chewing on his stylus like it owes him money. The bride herself, not in the room. Naturally, because this is ancient Greece, where a woman's opinion on her own marriage ranks somewhere between maybe and irrelevant. You're ushered in like some sort of character witness. You still have poultice on your knee and a blood stain on your sleeve. But no one seems to care. You're offered a seat, a cup of flat wine, and a honeyed fig that glues your fingers together like ancient superglue. You nod to everyone. No one nods back. The bride's father begins. She's obedient, has all her teeth, and can weave an entire tunic in a week. Applause. The groom's father responds, "My son owns 2 donkeys, can read Homer without drooling, and bathes weekly." More applause. The negotiation unfolds like a livestock auction with higher stakes. Dowries are discussed. Livestock is compared. One man pulls out a small clay tablet and starts calculating the inflation-adjusted value of 3 amphorae of olive oil and a goat with a limp. You lean toward the bored scribe. "Do they always go like this?" He shrugs. "Sometimes there's more yelling. One time a pig got involved. You decide not to ask further. Eventually, both sides agree. The dowry will include 30 drachmas, 2 linen chitons, and a bronze cooking pot. In return, the bride gets a husband, a corner of his oikos, and the lifelong opportunity to never eat meals in public again. Exciting. Marriage in ancient Greece isn't about romance, it's about alliance, inheritance, and making more citizens. Love, that's for poets. Or tragedies, often both. Historians still argue whether affection ever factored into Greek marriage, or if it was just a convenient byproduct like crumbs after a feast. The scribe writes up the contract. Everyone spits lightly for good luck. You're not sure if you're supposed to do the same. So you pretend to cough. It works. Afterward, you're treated to a celebratory meal. Sort of. There's a boiled onion, a chunk of salted fish that's more bone than meat, and some roasted chickpeas that crack your molars on impact. Still, you're hungry. So you chew carefully and smile, like this is the finest banquet you've ever had. You try to talk to one of the younger guests, a lanky cousin of the groom. He asks what you do for a living. You say, "Mostly trying not to get exiled." He nods. Solemnly, once the meal ends, you're roped into a ritual gift delivery. You, and several other unlucky attendees, must now parade the dowry items across town to the groom's house, carrying the bronze pot, in full public view, while people shout congratulations and occasionally throw olives. The streets are alive with curious onlookers. One man yells, "How much for the pot?" Another shouts, "Hope she can cook better than her mother." You quicken your pace. At the groom's house, there's a quiet little ceremony. A clay lamp is lit, and the bride finally visible. Eyes cast downward is led inside. She says nothing. You lower the pot gently by the door and back away. Then you're offered a sprig of myrtle and a small cup of wine. You drink it. It's lukewarm. You think about modern weddings with toasts, dancing, and awkward uncles. Here, the awkward uncle is the officiant. Outside, twilight is spreading like spilled ink over the rooftops. You walk back slowly, sandals scuffing the dusty stone, belly full of salt and your ears still ringing from the phrase, well-bred daughter. You pass through the agora as merchants pack up their stalls. One is arguing with a customer over the spiritual worth of a cracked vase. Another is carving tiny animals out of dried figs and humming what might be an ancient breakup song. You stop briefly at a fountain to rinse your sticky hands, and a boy next to you mumbles, "If I get married, I'm running away." You nod. Then he adds, "To Sparta." You reconsider nodding. Night falls. The stars appear one by one, just like they did last night and will tomorrow. You hear a flute in the distance. Someone nearby lights a torch and curses loudly about bees. Life in Athens. Same as ever. Back at your quarters, you collapse onto the straw pallet. Exhausted in every imaginable way, you reflect on the marriage contract, the goat from yesterday, the physician's herbs still lodged in your pores, and the way the bride never spoke a word. And just as your eyelids close, there's a knock at the door, a messenger again. You're expected at the harbor. Trade inspection. At dawn. You don't scream. You just roll over. Whisper, of course. And fall asleep in your sandals. You're down at the harbor before the sun has fully committed to showing up. The sky is a soft, bruised purple. Gulls are shrieking like angry ghosts. And someone nearby is already arguing about the price of dried squid. Classic Piraeus morning. The port is chaos, but organized chaos. Like if ants developed a currency system and really cared about amphora quality. Boats bob in the water. Sails half furled. Hulls groaning under the weight of wine jars. Olive oil. Figs. Wool. And what might be an alarming number of turtles. Sailor bark orders. Slavis unload kratis. And customs officials strut around with clay tablets and expressions of profound self-importance. Your job, apparently, is to assist with Emporian inspection, ensuring imported goods are legit and haven't been tampered with, diluted, or sneakily swapped for rocks. You're handed a stylus, a tally sheet, and a very vague set of instructions. Something about counting jars and checking seals. Or maybe it was, don't get bribed, too obviously. Your partner for the morning is a port official named Euthydemus. He's balding, smells faintly of anchovies, and has a tattoo of a fish on his forearm, labeled Philippa, my first boat. He explains, also my first wife. You decide not to ask follow-ups. The first shipment you check is a load of olive oil from Lesbos. Euthydemus shows you how to test for purity. Uncork a jug. Sniff. Swill. Taste. Then spit dramatically into the sea. You do this. It smells like olives. It tastes like olives. You spit dramatically. A seagull shrieks approval. Next. Wine from Chios. You open one amphora. Take a sip. And cough violently. It's good. Euthydemus says, you can tell by how badly it burns your nose. He nods thoughtfully. Then writes, acceptable, on the tablet. There's wool from Thrace soft. White. And crawling with tiny bugs. Authentic. He says, there's grain from Egypt. You open the crate and are immediately engulfed in a puff of grain dust. You sneeze 8 times. The dockhand offers you a fig in consolation. Then come the less conventional imports, a crate of parrots squawking, feathered chaos. One shouts Athena's knees at full volume. You blink. We don't even know where they learned that. Eutidemos muters. A barrel-marked mystery delicacies. Inside eels. Still alive. You clap it shut. Ard pass. A shipment of foreign dolls made of painted wood. A customs clerk whispers they're cursed. One's missing an eye. It's looking directly at you. You casually back away. Then, a merchant attempts to bribe you, slips you a small pouch of raisins, and says, maybe don't notice how many jars are missing. Eutidemos stares him down. We'll need to see your receipts. The merchant sulks. You keep the raisins. For evidence, historians still argue whether Athenian trade was more regulated or corrupt. The truth, probably a tangled rope of both, knotted by bribes and bureaucracy. Mid-morning turns the harbor into a furnace. The sun bounces off the water. The sails, the stacked amphorae, everything becomes bright and sharp. Your tunic sticks to your back. You wipe your forehead with a receipt scroll. Euthythemos doesn't notice. A sailor offers to sell you genuine Persian spices. You ask to see them. He opens a pouch of what looks like dried weeds and one half of a scorpion. Pass. You say. Later. A foreign ambassador's ship arrives. Big. Fancy. Covered in gold trim. The crew wears matching tunics. They unload a statue of a winged horse, a crate of perfume bottles, and an awkwardly large lyre that takes 4 men to carry. You look at Euthydemus. He shrugs. Show-offs. As you're finishing your last inspection dried pomegranates. Slightly suspicious, you hear a loud crack. A cart overloaded with amphorae has collapsed nearby. Wine everywhere. A small boy slips in the puddle, laughs hysterically, and then rolls in it like a feral dolphin. His mother throws a sandal at him. You're summoned for a quick debrief. A magistrate wants the tallies. You hand over your wax tablet. Realizing you've doodled a goat in the margins, you hope he doesn't notice. He does. He nods approvingly. Symbol of vigilance. He says, sure, you're released from duty by early afternoon. Blistered, salt-streaked, and craving a nap. But as you walk up from the docks, past the fish sellers and philosophers shouting at passing turtles, something catches your attention, a man in the square announcing a poetry competition. Apparently, it's open mic. You laugh. Then realize he's pointing at you. Come on, he says. New voices welcome. Theme is regret and raisins, or just whatever rhymes. You open your mouth to object, but somehow you're handed a lyre. The strings are uneven. A dog howls in the distance. The crowd gathers. You take a breath and recite. I once inspected fish by trade. Now forced to rhyme in market shade. My sandals squelch with briny brine. Someone help. I'm out of line. There's a pause. Then, laughter. Cheers. Someone throws you a fig. You bow. Or collapse. Maybe both. And, as you walk away, fig in hand. A new summons finds you. Temple procession tomorrow. Full dress. You look at your filthy tunic, full dress. You sigh. Ancient Greece never sleeps. You awaken with a fig stuck to your cheek, and the words, regret and raisins, still echoing faintly in your head. It's barely light out, and already the street buzzes with preparations. Today's the big temple procession. And guess who's on the participant list? That's right. You? Again, outside. The city's humming. Priests and priestesses dart past, arms full of laurel wreaths and garlands of marigold. Trumpeters warm up with long, reedy blasts that sound like confused elephants. You're handed a folded chiton, bright white. Slightly too long. And definitely not yours. Procession regulation. Someone explains. You'll be walking in front of the sacred olive branch. Don't trip. Right. You're shoved into a line of equally confused civilians, all dressed in varying degrees of ceremonial effort. A potter with chalk on his nose. A shepherd clutching a lamb like it's a stress ball. A woman muttering what sounds like a hymn, but could also be her grocery list. A tall priestess begins barking orders formation. Pace. Gnaw. Improvising. You try to nod respectfully, but accidentally drop your laurel crown. The boy behind you helpfully puts it back onto your shoulder. Close enough. Drums begin. Slow. Deep. Rhythmic. The line starts to move. You step forward. Part of a living river of fabric and flower petals winding its way through the city toward the Acropolis. People on the sidelines cheer or toss herbs into the air. Children run alongside, imitating the marchers, waving little wooden snakes and shouting "Praise Athena," or possibly, "Where's the cheese?" hard to tell. The scent of the crowd is a mix of sweat, rosemary, and civic pride. Your chiton starts to chafe around the knees. A man next to you, who claims to be an amateur oracle, keeps whispering your future. You will step in something unpleasant, he says. Moments later, you do. It's fruit. Probably, the procession stops at key altars along the way. Offerings are made bread, honey, wine, tiny clay cows. A poet recites a tribute to the goddess that involves 15 metaphors for wisdom and at least one accidental pun about figs. People applaud politely. You finally reach the base of the Acropolis. And now comes the climb. Hundreds of steps. Steep and unforgiving. The sacred olive branch bearers lead the way, followed by the dancers in their stiff robes. Their movements, a delicate mix of elegance and trying not to faceplant. Behind them, musicians play reed pipes. It's all very dignified until one lyre string snaps, and the musician yelps like he's been struck by Zeus himself. You make it to the top winded and somehow more sunburned. The great temple looms above you, columns glowing in the morning light. The statue of Athena waits inside, tall and golden and glaring, like she just caught someone double-dipping in the sacred hummus. A young girl, chosen months ago for this moment, steps forward with a ceremonial robe, beautifully woven, covered in depictions of gods, battles, and at least one confused dolphin. She presents it to the priestesses, who drape it over the ancient wooden statue known as the Exonon. It's one of the oldest cult images in Athens, rumored to have fallen from the heavens, or carved during a thunderstorm. Historians still argue whether it's divine or just aggressively early woodwork. You can't see much from where you stand. But the hush that falls over the crowd is enough. This is the city's heart. The ritual is complete. There's a moment where time holds its breath. And then it exhales. Loudly, a cheer goes up. Trumpets blare. Drums pound. You're handed a sweet cake you don't remember earning. But you eat it anyway. It's dry. But it's food. And it's not eel. So you call it a win. The festival continues with games in the Panathenaic Stadium. You find yourself dragged into the crowd. Watching young athletes hurl javelins and wrestle like their lives depend on it. One boy throws a discus. So far, it vanishes over the hill. No one sees it land. They just clap and declare it divinely guided. You're offered a seat by an older woman, knitting what appears to be a very tiny toga. She tells you about the time she saw Pericles trip during a speech and insists the man had weak ankles. You nod solemnly. Nearby, a vendor sells garlands and authentic Olympic sand in small clay jars. You buy one, even though you're 98% sure the sand is from a nearby alley. A group of philosophers sits under a fig tree arguing about whether the games promote virtue or just sweaty egos. One man declares, "The true prize is honor," the other mutters. Try telling that to a man who lost his loincloth mid-wrestle. As the sun reaches its peak, you find a bit of shade near the stadium wall, and finally get to sit. Your feet throb. Your face is crusted with flour from the ceremonial cake. And your sacred chiton now has a grape stain shaped like a goat. You think maybe, just maybe, you'll get to rest. That's when someone taps your shoulder and says, "You've been summoned for tax review." Of course you have. You don't even argue anymore. You just nod. Adjust your laurel crown now wilting tragically, and begin the slow march toward your next civic torment. Because in ancient Greece, there are two things you can't escape: the gods and the aisphora. You're back in the agora. The sun, now, a blazing coin balanced high in the sky, casting every marble column and pottery stall into crisp-edged shadows. Your chiton is glued to your back. You're dehydrated, emotionally frayed, and somehow still dragging olive petals from the morning's temple procession. And yet, here you are, standing in line for the dreaded aisphora, the Athenian tax review. There's no comforting cubicle. No mild-mannered accountant in sandals asking if you'd like to itemize your livestock. No. Tax, in ancient Greece, is a public spectacle. A civic shaming ritual with paperwork scratched into wax and witnesses judging your every sheep. You're herded toward a makeshift desk under an awning, manned by two stern officials and one sleepy scribe who hasn't looked up from his wax tablet in half an hour. He might be dead. Hard to tell. Name the first official barks. You give the name you've been using something vaguely local. Not too fancy. Not too suspicious. Profession, he asks. You pose. Yesterday you carried a goat. The day before you read poetry about raisins. And last week you sold pottery for 2 hours. Miscellaneous civic contributions. You say. He writes wandering laborer. Sounds about right. Do you own land? No. Livestock? No. Any warships? You blink. Do I look like I own a warship? He raises an eyebrow and writes, no assets. The other official, a squat man, with a nose like a chipped amphora, leans forward. But you've participated in public events. Torchbearing, essence d'outil, verpoetry. He glances at a small wooden tally. You're overdue for a liturgia. Your stomach sinks. Liturgia, a public service tax, often assigned to wealthy citizens. Building triremes, funding dramas, sponsoring sacrifices. You're not wealthy. You're barely conscious. I have nothing, you say honestly, except maybe some ceremonial sand in a jar. He says. You could be a triarchos. We've got an old hull you could refurbish. You try to protest, but are interrupted by a voice behind you, shouting, He once spilled wine on the sacred bull meat. That's enough to derail the conversation. Everyone looks at you. You shrug. It was symbolic. The officials argue. Eventually, they downgrade your obligation to festival support. You must assist with stage setup for an upcoming tragedy. Manual labor instead of debt. You'll take it. Historians still argue whether the Athenian liturgy system truly promoted fairness or just humiliated the middle tier of society into accidental philanthropy with your civic shame slightly reduced. You're dismissed. You walk away through the thrumming agora, past vendors selling pomegranates, bronze combs, and counterfeit scrolls. A boy offers you a miniature clay bust of Socrates for wisdom. You ask if it works. He says, sometimes. You meander toward the theater district, where wooden platforms are being assembled for the upcoming Dionysian play. The air smells like sawdust, sweat, and an actor's ego. The lead performer, a man with wild hair and sandals more dramatic than his gestures, spots you and waves. Ah, our new set assistant. He immediately puts you to work, hauling a painted backdrop of Mount Olympus up a ladder made of questionable twine. The backstage area is a glorious mess. Props scattered everywhere, fake swords, overly realistic severed heads, and one disturbingly lifelike pig mask. Masks are key in Greek theater. Big expressions, exaggerated features. No, subtlety. The audience is too far away to read eyebrow raises. You get roped into mask testing. Someone slaps a grinning Dionysus face over yours. It smells like mold and ambition. Perfect, says the director. Just stand over there and emote air. You emote. No one notices. The actors rehearse. The play is a tragedy. Something about a prince who falls in love with a tree that turns out to be his mother. Classic. One actor keeps forgetting his lines and improvises references to olives. Another refuses to die unless his character gets a monologue about goats. There's tension. A group of flute players enters too early and are told to circle the stage like confused wind. They interpret this with alarming accuracy. Eventually, someone brings bread and dates. You devour yours under a prop chariot, watching as two chorus members argue over foot placement during a synchronized lament. It's unclear who's winning. As twilight settles, the rehearsal ends. You're covered in sawdust and possibly glitter. The lead actor thanks you dramatically and offers you a role. You politely decline. He insists. You run. Outside, the street glows gold and orange. Oil lamps are being lit. You find yourself at a fountain. washing off the worst of the day. A philosopher is holding a debate with a fishmonger nearby. What is value, he asks. The fishmonger answers, 2 obols, a kilo. As you dry your hands, a boy runs by with a scroll and a panicked look. Plague in the outer districts, he shouts. Or maybe just bad lentils. Everyone groans. You sigh. You were almost safe. Back at your quarters. You lie down, arms aching from stage carpentry, legs aching from civic disappointment, brain aching from masks and taxes, and just before sleep takes you, someone knocks and says, "You're on plague patrol tomorrow." Of course you are. At this point, you don't even flinch when the knock comes before dawn. You just roll off your straw mat, scrape fig paste off your elbow, and mutter, "Plague patrol." Naturally, the runner at your door hands you a wreath of garlic and a small cloth sachet that smells like disappointment steeped in vinegar. "For protection," he says, and sprints off before you can ask. Protection from what? Exactly. You trudge through half-lit alleys toward the outskirts of Athens, where rumors of sickness have been flaring like poorly managed torchlight. The streets are quieter than usual. Market stalls are shuttered. The air hangs heavy, less breeze. More stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once and stops. Dramatic. Your plague patrol team consists of a healer's apprentice named Cleon, 2 bored-looking guards, and a flute player for morale. The flute player is already out of breath and sweating through his chiton, which doesn't inspire confidence. Cleon hands you a mask, just a bit of cloth tied around your nose and mouth. It won't stop anything, he admits, but it makes people feel better. You tie it on anyway. It smells faintly of time and panic. You're briefed. Your job is to check in on homes where illness has been reported. Symptoms range from coughing like Zeus, clearing his throat, to eyes weeping black stuff. You consider turning around. Instead, you fall into step behind Cleon, who carries a pouch full of garlic, salt, and bitter herbs, like a low-budget exorcist. The first house you visit is marked with a smudge of ash above the door. Inside, it's dark, hot, and close. A woman lies on a mat, her skin slick with sweat, lips cracked like old pottery. Her husband says she started with a fever and now speaks only in riddles. She asked if the figs know we eat them. He says. Cleon hums, presses a hand to her forehead, and mutters something about unbalanced humors. He leaves a packet of herbs and tells the husband to boil it in wine and hope. You nod solemnly, though you suspect hope is in short supply. Outside, the guards kick at the dirt. One mutters, "Could be the gods." The other says, "Could be tainted cheese." Historians still argue whether these plagues were true pandemics or outbreaks worsened by sanitation that involved chamber pots and goats roaming freely. You visit 5 more houses. The sick are pale, listless, or burning hot to the touch. One child clutches a doll shaped like Apollo and whispers, "The sun god is angry." Another asks if you're a doctor. You say, "Sort of." Cleon snorts. At one home, you find an old man who insists he isn't sick, just grieving from too much soup. He offers you a turnip. You decline. The flute player attempts to cheer one alley by playing a lively tune A cat attacks him. No one intervenes. As midday approaches, the heat becomes unbearable. Your mask is soaked with sweat. You smell like a salad that's been left in the sun. You pass a temple where priests are offering prayers to Asclepius, god of healing. The altar is piled high with offerings bread, fruit, and one suspiciously carved cucumber. You leave a coin and whisper, "I don't need a miracle, just a break." Next up, the public fountain district. Word is, a few residents collapsed here while fetching water. You arrive to find it roped off with bits of twine and an angry chicken patrolling the perimeter. A woman argues with a guard. "My cousin touched that column, and now she hears frogs in her dreams." Cleon rolls his eyes. "That's not how disease works." She glares. "How do you know?" "Are you a god?" he mutters. "I'm a medical intern." You check the water source clear. Cool. Apparently untainted. Still. You sprinkle in some bitter herbs and mark the stone with a warning sigil. Just in case. It might help. Or not. But it looks impressive. And that's half the battle. As you make your way back into the heart of the city, rumors buzz like flies. The illness came from a merchant ship. Or a cursed oracle. Or too many figs consumed during a waxing moon. Everyone has a theory. No one has a cure. You pass the agora. Now, half empty. The vendors still open are selling garlic wreaths, snake oil, and sacred goat hair amulets. One man claims his amulets cured an entire street in Corinth. Just don't get them wet. He warns. You don't ask why. You sit under a portico to rest, sipping stale water from a borrowed jug. A small boy sits next to you, holding a clay toy shaped like a lion. "Will the sickness eat my mother?" he asks. You pose. "No." You say softly, "Not if we help her." It's a lie. Or a hope. Possibly both. Cleon appears beside you, handing out lemon-flavored fig chews. "For morale," he says, "and scurvy." By late afternoon, your group disbands. The guards head to the barracks. The flute player limps away with cat scratches and a bruised ego. Cleon nods, muttering, "See you next plague." You wander home through quiet streets. A breeze picks up. Finally, it smells like thyme, smoke, and, faintly, of whatever dignity you lost sometime around goat duty. Back in your quarters, you peel off your dusty chiton, scrub your hands with wine, and fall face first into your mat. You close your eyes. And there it is again, a voice. Gentle this time. You're needed at the theater. Curtains in an hour. You mutter, "I'd rather wrestle Hecamon." The voice replies, "He's in the play, too." Perfect. You show up at the theater still smelling faintly of garlic, ash, and medical despair. The theatron looms above you, carved into the slope of a hill like a giant stone bowl, ready to catch the day's drama, and, in your case, your dignity. Actors scurry like toga-clad ants. Musicians tune lyres with frantic fingers. And a chorus line practices synchronized lamentations like it's an Olympic sport. Someone hands you a costume without explanation. It's a massive linen tunic stitched with golden thread. overly dramatic shoulder pads, and a mask that looks like a startled donkey. You ask, "What role am I?" They say, "You're the chorus of guilt." Perfect. You're not on stage alone. At least, the chorus in Greek theater is a crowd effort, a group that sings, dances, and occasionally steps forward to speak in ominous riddles or helpful recaps for the confused. In your case, you're one of 12 men playing abstract human emotions. Your guilt. Someone tells you, try to embody the sense of waking up at noon and realizing you forgot to pay your taxes. That's the vibe. The play itself is a tragedy. Of course, a prince accidentally curses his own household. His father marries a frog disguised as a goddess, and someone dies via poisoned grape. It's unclear if it's a metaphor or just a creative interpretation of famine. Your entrance dramatic shuffle stage left, moaning about divine punishment and tax burdens. You do it perfectly. The audience, hundreds of citizens, sitting in semicircles of stone benches, watches intently. Everyone's here: merchants, soldiers, potters, philosophers. Even that goat from earlier, you swear it recognizes you. High up in the theatron, the peanut gallery murmurs and snickers. Kids eat roasted chickpeas and throw shells at each other between acts. The lead actor, a broad-chested man with a booming voice, delivers lines like thunder. Woe to the house that forgets its garden. The crowd gasps. Someone yells, "Water your figs, idiot." The chorus jumps in, chanting about hubris and fate. You sway and groan on cue, remembering not to fall over your too long hem. It's hot. The mask itches, and your sandals are full of sand from yesterday's stage work. But strangely, you're kind of into it. The play reaches its climax. The heroine confronts her doomed lover. "I saw you in the omens wrapped in sheep wool," babbling nonsense. She screams. He replies, "That was ritual preparation." She stabs him with a sharpened olive branch. The crowd roars. The final chorus enters to sing about divine justice. You're still guilt. So you hunch over, clutch your head, and wail like someone who bet all his drachmas on a turtle race. It's emotionally devastating, or at least very loud. The curtain, well, a painted cloth drops. The actors bow. The audience cheers. Someone throws flower petals. Someone else throws a dried fig. You catch it. Backstage, the energy is electric. Actors unmask, sweaty and hoarse, congratulating each other, like returning warriors. The lead actor slaps your back and says, "You groaned beautifully." High praise. You grin through the heat haze. You help carry props off stage, a fake altar, a chariot wheel, and a stuffed pigeon used for comedic relief. The director praises the realism of your tax guilt. You say, "I drew from life." Historians still argue whether Greek theater served more as entertainment or moral instruction. But as you watch people file out into the dusk discussing fate, olives, and whether poisoned grapes can actually kill someone, you realize it was both, and kind of fabulous. Afterward, you follow the flow of people to a nearby Capellian, a sort of casual tavern where wine is cheap, food is salty, and opinions are loud. You're handed a shallow cup of wine and sit beside a carpenter ranting about the chorus's rhythm being too iambic. He says this while eating a boiled onion like an apple. You nod politely. Someone buys a round for the actors. You don't correct them. You eat pickled fish, roasted chickpeas, and something that might be lamb or might be fig-stuffed mushroom. Either way, it's divine. A flute player stands on a crate and plays a love song to a pothos plant. People sway. Someone crees. You step outside to cool off. The streets are glowing from torchlight, and the stars above look sharper than they have any right to be. You sit on a bench next to an old woman weaving, who asks how your day was. You say, I played gilt and inspected parrots. She nods, like that makes perfect sense. And then, a final interruption. A boy with no shoes and a scroll too large for his arms. You're summoned to court. He pants. You stare at him. Again you whisper. This time, as a witness to a fig-related assault, you look up at the stars. Somewhere. The gods are laughing. You're back in court. Again. The Heliaea. Athens' buzzing concrete amphitheater of collective judgment and professional shouting. It's early, too early, and you're still tasting last night's pickled fish. Your sandals are lopsided. Your tunic is wrinkled in ways you can't explain. And your voice is hoarse from groaning, as the literal embodiment of guilt just 12 hours ago. This time, you're not here as a juror or vague civic ornament. You're a witness. Specifically, the only semi-conscious person present when a man allegedly slapped another man with a fig. You're not sure what's worse, being dragged into legal fig drama, or the fact that this is somehow not the strangest thing you've done this week. The court clerk, a puffy-cheeked man who looks like he stores acorns in his tunic for emergencies, calls your name. You step up, eyes bleary, greeted by the accusatory glare of two men, one wearing a toga smudged with what looks like mashed fruit, the other holding a clay pot labeled Exhibit Fig. The prosecutor begins. My client, he bellows, was enjoying a peaceful symposium when he was struck in the face with a very ripe fig, causing embarrassment, staining of garments, and a temporary loss of dignity. There are chuckles from the gallery. He continues. The defendant claims it was an accident, but our witness, he gestures to you, was there. You clear your throat. Yes, I was seated near the snack tray. The defense stands, arms wide, voice oily. This entire case is a misunderstanding. A fig bounced. It bounced. Who among us hasn't flung food mid-conversation? You glance at the magistrate. He looks like he'd rather be anywhere else. Possibly in Sparta. Possibly dead. They press you for details. How fast was the fig flying? Did it have the consistency of a dried fig or one soaked in wine? Were there intentions behind the throw? You say, I think he meant to hit the goat. Gasps. Not because the goat was involved, but because it wasn't invited to court. A murmur ripples through the jurors. One man starts scribbling a sketch of the incident in the dust with a stylus. The sketch fig has surprisingly good texture. Eventually, your testament wraps. You're thanked. You think? Or maybe dismissed. It's hard to tell. You slink away to the back benches and watch the trial spin into increasing absurdity. Legal theater. No masks, no chorus, just indignation and potential fruit violence. Historians still argue whether the Athenian legal system promoted justice or simply public catharsis, but here, in the middle of fig-based vengeance, it's definitely both. By midday, the court rules the fig thrower must pay a fine 1 drachma and a replacement tunic. The crowd applauds. The plaintiff bows. You consider leaving Athens and becoming a quiet fisherman. Outside, the agora pulses with life again. You try to disappear into it. But no such luck. A young apprentice spots you and shouts, "The oracle's speaking." Your stomach drops. The oracle, a wild-eyed priestess housed in a smoky little temple who speaks in riddles and fumes. Of course you're going. You follow a trickle of curious citizens through winding alleys to a small, circular shrine tucked beneath a hill. Incense curls through the air. A line of seekers waits their turn to ask the oracle questions like, "Should I plant barley this week? And will my cousin return my goat?" The priestess sits behind a veil of linen, surrounded by smoking herbs and a large bowl of what might be lentils. She sways as she speaks, eyes rolled skyward. Your turn comes. You step forward. She inhales deeply and says, "You are like the olive bitter in youth, useful in middle age, slippery at all times." You wait. "That's it," she nods. "Also beware of birds bearing messages." Noted. You bow. Confused. Grateful. Possibly cursed. You leave the shrine and immediately get pooped on by a pigeon. Classic. You clean up by a fountain, only for a group of teens to recognize you from the theater. "Hey, it's Guilt Guy," they shout. You wave half-heartedly. Later, you wander through the workshops. A potter shapes a vessel shaped like a fish. A metalworker burns his fingers shaping a lyre. A woman selling herbs tells you your aura smells like onions. It's been a rough month. You mutter. Evening creeps in. You find yourself sitting on a rooftop ledge, watching the sun smear across the rooftops like spilled wine. Below, you hear laughter, arguments, and a very energetic flute solo. You let your shoulders relax, until, because this is your life now, a runner appears below, waving a scroll. "Come quickly," he yells. You shout back. "Why? Who's sick now?" No sickness. There's a dinner party. You're the entertainment. You close your eyes. You count to 4. You sigh. Of course you are. You arrive at the dinner party, or, more precisely, you stumble into the threshold of a wealthy merchant's andron. Sticky with sweat, pigeon, traumatized, and still faintly fig-scented, the servant at the door gives you a look that hovers between amusement and mild alarm. "Entertainment?" he asks. You nod. "That's me. Resident guilt groaner. Also, amateur witness and full-time plague dodger." He blinks, shrugs, and lets you in. The room is dimly lit. Walls painted in vibrant colors, reds, blacks, ochres depicting gods, doing highly questionable things with mortals and kitchen tools. The couches are arranged in a horseshoe, with men reclining, sipping diluted wine, and debating whether Homer ever made up that entire Cyclops thing just for the drama. As you approach, the host, A rotund man, with a beard like a foamy sponge, waves a jeweled hand. Ah, our evening's muse has arrived. He gestures to an empty cushion between two senators, one of whom is already asleep, and the other of whom is meticulously peeling a grape with a stylus. You recline awkwardly, nearly upending the wine crater. Someone hands you a cup and says, "You'll need it." Dinner begins with olives, chickpeas, soft cheese, and fish that tastes like it's been personally rejected by Poseidon. But you're too hungry to argue. You eat. The host tells a story about a wine merchant who mistook his wife for a statue and tried to sell her. It gets a laugh. Then comes the symposiarch, the wine master, elected by whim and loud voice. He's wearing a crown made of celery. He announces the evening's drinking rules: 1 cup for health, 2 for humor, 3 for truth, 4 for embarrassment, 5 for divine revelations, and anything beyond that is up to the fates. You pace yourself, mostly between sips and nibbles. Debates break out. What is the most noble pursuit? Someone asks. Justice, says one man. Virtue, says another. Not choking on fish bones, says the man peeling grapes. You offer avoiding civic duties by pretending to be asleep. Polite laughter. A fig lands on your plate. A gift. Perhaps. Then comes your moment. The host claps his hands. Now our guest. A tale. A lesson. Something boring but brilliant. You stand? Or rather, you wobble upward. You scan the room. You begin. Once, in the time of Cleisthenes, a man named Demarchus was fined 17 drachmas for sneezing too loudly during a festival. You continue. The story spirals into a saga of bureaucratic mix-ups, mistaken goods, and a lost scroll that turned out to be a shopping list. You sprinkle in just enough civic vocabulary to make it sound plausible, and just enough snark to keep the crowd chuckling. And to this day, the Temple of Apollo has a staircase that's slightly crooked because no one wanted to offend the architect's mother-in-law. The room roars. Someone coughs wine through their nose. A senator throws a pillow. A flute begins to play. Not well, but with enthusiasm. A man starts dancing in slow, interpretive circles that resemble a wounded stork. The chorus joins in stomping, clapping, and occasionally shouting taxes at random intervals. The food keeps coming: dates, honey cakes, fried cheese in grape syrup. The wine does too. You begin to suspect the cup is bottomless. You accidentally call someone your Majesty. They're a fishmonger. Later in the evening, the conversation drifts toward dreams. One man claims he dreamed of a 3-headed goat reciting legal codes. Another says he became a vase and couldn't stop screaming. Everyone has a theory. You offer nothing but a vague shrug and a muttered, "I once dreamed I had a day off." The room falls silent. Someone raises their cup and says, "To the impossible." You drink to that? Near midnight, the host thanks everyone and begins handing out parting gifts. You receive a small clay figurine of Athena holding a wine jug. It has one arm missing. "She's seen things," says the host solemnly. You step out into the cool night. your body buzzing with wine and crumbs and a sense of surreal peace. The stars are out again, sharp and familiar. You make your way home slowly, sandals scuffing the stones, brain humming. As you near your street, a dog follows you, not aggressively, just curious. You share a piece of honey cake with him. He approves. You reach your mat. Finally, you lie down, curled slightly, Athena figurine still clutched in your hand. You close your eyes. There's no knock tonight, only sleep. Sweet, deep, long overdue sleep, at least, until morning, when someone will surely need you to supervise a goat census. Sleep is brief, predictably, because no one in ancient Greece ever truly rests, not when there are goats to count, temples to sweep, or amphorae to move slightly to the left for reasons known only to the gods. You wake to the sound of clanging pottery, distant flute wailing, and a familiar voice shouting. He overslept again. Get the fig. You sit up before impact. No fig. Progress. Today, you've been assigned to the Agora Census Crew, a group responsible for conducting a semi-official inventory of livestock, stall goods, and people who might not actually exist, but still owe taxes. You're handed a dull stylus, a wax tablet already half melted, and a list that simply reads, goats, chickpeas, suspicious merchants. You trudge toward the heart of the city. The Agora is already a madhouse. Vendors shout, children scream. A philosopher tries to sell conceptual onions and gets slapped with a very real one. You duck behind a pillar and begin counting livestock. 2 goats, 3 sheep, 1 particularly smug donkey. You tally. You lose count. You start again. A man interrupts you. Counted that goat twice. You eye the goat. He definitely walked back through the square for a second helping of olives. You nod. He's committed tax fraud. The man nods solemnly. Later, you encounter a merchant selling authentic Spartan toothpicks, tiny sticks with bits of charcoal on the ends. You ask if they're certified. He says, certified pointy. You move on. At the chickpea stand, a woman accuses her neighbor of using foreign legumes. These are Phocian, not Attic. He's undermining the market. An argument erupts. You take notes. The chickpeas stare back blankly. By midday, your list is a mess of tallies, scribbled warnings, and at least one doodle of a goat in a wig. The census captain appears, grabs your tablet, nods, and says, looks official. Then he asks if you'd like to supervise the afternoon's Ephebi parade. That's right. Military trainees, marching, singing songs about glory and sandal maintenance. You trail the Ephebi's barely bearded youths with wooden spears and voices cracking through oaths of loyalty. One trips on his own foot and falls into a cabbage cart. No one helps him. A goat eats the fallen cabbage. Ancient circle of life. As they march, older citizens shout encouragements. Or heckles. Straighten your back. Your grandfather wrestled centaurs better than that. Stop drooling on your javelin. You stand at the corner, pretending to be an official while sipping warm, watered wine from a borrowed cup. One Ephebi salutes you dramatically. You salute back with your spoon. Afternoon slides toward dusk. You help reset fallen boundary stones along the path. Assist a lost grandmother looking for her son. He turns out to be asleep in the public bathhouse. And carry an amphora of olives, 5 blocks because someone promised you a slice of honey cake. You never get the cake. At last, as twilight settles, you're free. You return to your favorite fountain now, flickering with lamplight and echoing with distant flute music. You sit. You breathe. Athens unfolds before you in layers, smoke from ovens curling up from rooftops. Shouts from the agora, drifting lazily through alleys. The clatter of sandals against marble. And laughter. So much laughter. Not just from festivals or jokes, but from life messy, chaotic, unreasonable life. And you've lived it. Somehow, you've scraped incense bowls, taken a punch to the neck in the name of gymnasium, impersonated abstract emotions, and delivered bread while bleeding from papyrus paper cuts. You've survived figs, oracles, ghost goats, and aggressive teenagers with too many olives. Historians still argue whether daily Athenian life was joyful or unbearable. It's both. Beautiful and brutal. Crumb-covered and chaotic. And now, a part of you forever smells like wine-soaked chickpeas. You rise, stretch, and walk home beneath the stars. The streets are calmer now. A woman hums while sweeping her doorway. A cat watches you from a windowsill, judging silently. You tip an imaginary laurel crown. You reach your doorway. Inside, the straw mat beckons like a siren. You lie down. You exhale. No knocks, no summons. Only stillness and sleep. And now, as the lanterns flicker low and the streets of ancient Athens fade into gentle silence, your breath begins to slow. The marble cools. The air softens. The fires at the altars dim. Glowing embers swaying with the wind like fading thoughts. You've wandered through noise and nonsense. Through trials of sand, sweat, and olives. You've played guilt in the theater, debated taxes with a man who wore a celery crown, and outlasted a goat in both stubbornness and dramatic exits. You've bowed before statues, napped beside the fountains, whispered your testimony about airborne figs, and tried to read omens in burned barley. You've done enough for 10 lifetimes. And somehow, you're still standing. Just barely. Your limbs are heavy now. Not from labor, but from history. From stories. From sandals walked thin across cracked stones under an indifferent sun. The gods have stopped watching. The goat has stopped following you. Even the flute player has gone to bed. So let your thoughts drift gently. Lazily. Like smoke rising from temple incense. Let them curl around sleepy choruses. Moonlit rooftops. And the quiet wisdom of crumb-strewn benches. You've made it. Friend. Through Athens. Through absurdity. Through every little misstep the ancient world had waiting for you. And now you rest. The amphora is empty. The fig is uneaten. The sky is velvet, and you are. At long last, he allowed to close your eyes. Good night. Time traveler, sleep well. Sweet dreams.